Now, I beg your pardon. Regional leaders in Somalia have called for the president and prime minister to end a feud that risked plunging the country into further instability. On Thursday, President Mohamed Farmaajo suspended the executive powers of the prime minister, Mohamed Hussein Roble. Now, the head of state justified his decision, saying that the prime minister had taken imprudent decision that could pave the way for political and security instability. The two men, who have had a tense relationship for several months, have clashed twice in the past 10 days over dismissals and appointments to key security positions. And for some analysis, we're now joined by Ebrahim Deen, researcher at the Afro-Middle East Centre. Mr. Deen, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thanks for having me. Good evening to you as well.
Can the president of Somalia arbitrarily withdraw the powers of the prime minister? And what does it mean? I mean, is the prime minister's role now ceremonial? Can we say that Mohamed Hussein Roble is still part of the executive?
So one is, theoretically under the Constitution, he shouldn't be able to do this. He can't just suspend these powers and he can appoint the prime minister, but the prime minister would then have to be ratified by parliament. So it's in a sense unconstitutional. And it's in a sense also a further power grab by Farmaajo, who's been trying to do everything since last year to hold on to power, when in actual fact, it just seems as if his power base is weakening, and these things are actually hampering. So this is, this is in a context where we're supposed to have a local government election, and we're supposed to have the appointment of a new president, between October and November this year. And that just further stalls this process, and also, shows how Farmaajo is actually trying to hold on to power, now even against a prime minister that he previously appointed.
Now, in what way did Roble take imprudent decisions that could pave the way for political and security instability, as the president seems to suggest?
There's an election that's supposed to be happening now. And a big part of the election is, the voting and the voting process, and Roble was in charge of security and securing this vote. And if you have the person in charge of security, you then, in a sense, supposedly can influence the vote. And Farmaajo wants to keep on to this position. Now, what happened was, a few weeks ago, there was a spy that was abducted, a female spy, who later the president's intelligence chief said was killed by Shabab. And Shabab then issued a statement saying, we will take responsibility if we do this, which is true, but we never killed this lady. And, the prime minister doing the right thing, having the power to fire the security chief, fired the security chief, but this guy was then, the individual was hired by Farmaajo, mainly because Farmaajo sees him as being able to secure the vote for him, not necessarily secure the vote. And so for a period of time, we had two intelligence chiefs, and basically Farmaajo trying to override the powers of the prime minister. And the key reason for this is because there hasn't been any real condemnation of what he has been doing in the past couple of months. So the UN Security Council statement, for example, today is significant because it's all the members of the Security Council agree on the decision, but there doesn't seem to be any sanctions or any, punishment that he will face for this continued intransigence that he's been trying to do since February this year.
And Mr. Deen, this bickering seems to be around the intelligence and the security services agency and the handling of the investigation into the unexplained disappearance of a female officer, Ikran Talil. Is this perhaps a storm in a teacup, or is it something that could seriously derail the country and throw it into a constitutional crisis?
I think it was a storm in the teacup initially. Because it doesn't seem as if Ikran Talil has any real influence or real power. And it always happens generally when people try to hold on to power, that they take a decision or they assume that smaller issues are actually larger threats. But it's now a full-blown constitutional crisis. There's issue about the elections that are now a year late. There's issues about, the regions accepting the result of the elections. That's another issue. There's issues about the former opposition prime ministerial candidates forming their own coalition saying that the election is going to be fraudulent. Then there's the issue of Shabab still controlling most of the territory. So basically what we are having now is a constitutional crisis in a country that doesn't even control its own borders. And, we're seeing people fight over the spoils, and Farmaajo's intransigence actually is contributing to the situation, and Shabab will just most likely strengthen as a result.
Can you give us a breakdown of how Somalia's complex indirect electoral system works? And do you see the elections going ahead as planned in light of the row between, President and the Prime Minister?
So the Somali system works in a way where the different tribes, it's called a 4.5 system, have a say in government, in the positions held. And generally, form the upper house, which then, appoint the president. Then there's also a lower house, which is also, the lower house is formed by the tribes, the upper house is formed by the regions. So there's 8 different regions of the country. They have a Senate, in a sense, which also is involved in the appointing of the president. So there's those two issues. Now, what Farmaajo wanted was a direct rule system because he figured that would benefit him because, Mogadishu has a certain amount of seats in the system based on its region, based on its tribes. That what happened was this would disempower the regions, it would disempower the tribes, and it was actually more Farmaajo attempting to try and hold on to power. And so ever since September last year, there have been issues around, literally a year ago, around the new system for the elections. The indirect system was continued following the clashes in April, as a means of actually holding an election because Farmaajo's mandate expired in 2020 already. But this does put into real, jeopardy the process because the election is supposed to have already been happening at the moment. There's not yet even, most of the indirect seats categories or the indirect seats haven't yet been filled, leave alone, the elections for those indirect seats, leave alone the election or the appointment of the president. And that's the one issue. That's the problem. So there's the issue of the regions, there's the issue of the tribal vote, there's the issue of, these clashes within, in a sense, Farmaajo's camp. But also, the country is still fighting a militancy that seems to be strengthening. And Emerson is supposed to be moving out by the end of 2021. And, it's likely that these candidates are fighting for, an ever-shrinking pie. And actually, this then just strengthens Shabab, who argues that, the system itself is very problematic and actually needs to be overhauled, and that they're the only people who can do so. And, this solution becomes, or this, perception becomes increasingly prevalent when we have this current crisis where, basically the president's camp is infighting the president's camp as he's trying to hold on to power.
And this very public spat, how much of an impact would it have in terms of distracting Somalia from its bigger problems, for instance, fighting Al-Shabaab?
It basically strengthens Al-Shabaab. It's the biggest issue. Firstly, the election itself is very problematic in the sense that, the regions generally have their own independent policies that they do, excluding the state. So that's the one issue. So constitutionally is the problem, and that needs to be solved. There's also problems with Somalia, and its border dispute with Kenya, the fact that it also has issues disputes with Ethiopia, and also Shabab. This just shows how complex and how convoluted the system is and how it actually needs to be reformed. And Shabab then argues that, look here, the system is so complex and we, the only people who actually have a real system that can work in Somalia. And it seems to be working in the places that they control. And so this has strengthened Shabab. It strengthens Shabab's appeal, and it also distracts from the fight against Shabab, because instead of fighting Shabab, the different factions and the different militant groups are actually fighting each other. And so, in a context where Emerson is leading in 2021, we have a president who has no mandate. We have the regions who are fighting with the president. We have different opposition candidates in Mogadishu having their own security forces and also contesting the electoral process. Shabab currently seems, if you look at Shabab, how it's constituted, is the most sensible solution for ordinary Somalis, and that becomes a real problem.
All right, Mr. Deen, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That was Ebrahim Deen, a researcher at the Afro-Middle East Centre, joining us on the line. This is The Globe.